The sauna door slammed shut, sealing me in with the one man I swore I'd never face alone. My best friend's dad, Michael, sat across from me, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my throat tighten. At 22, I thought I knew how to handle myself until now. I'd known Michael Carter for years, ever since I started hanging out with his son, Jake, in high school. He was the kind of dad who commanded a room without trying to, with a voice like gravel and a smile that could make you feel like you mattered. But there was always something else in his gaze when it landed on me, something I couldn't name until tonight, something that scared me as much as it pulled me in. It was late, the gym nearly empty, and Jake had ditched me after our workout to meet his girlfriend. I'd wandered into the sauna to clear my head, expecting solitude. Instead, Michael was there, alone, his towel draped loosely over his lap, the air thick with heat and unspoken tension. I should have left. I didn't. "Elliot," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You're not running this time." My heart pounded. Running. I hadn't realized I'd been dodging him not consciously. But every time he got too close, asked too many questions about my life, my plans, my feelings, I'd find a way to slip out of the conversation. Jake always said his dad was intense, but this was different. This was personal. I adjusted my towel, suddenly hyper-aware of the sweat trickling down my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice betraying a tremor I hated. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving mine. "You've been avoiding me for years. Ever since that summer at the lake house. You think I didn't notice?" The lake house. For years ago. I was 18, still figuring out who I was, and Michael had caught me staring at him one night by the fire. I'd been mortified, certain he'd seen right through me, seeing the crush. I was too young, too confused to understand. I'd laughed it off, blamed the beer, but the memory burned. "I wasn't avoiding you," I lied, shifting on the bench. The heat was suffocating now, or maybe it was his stare. "I've just been busy." He chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver through me despite the warmth. "Busy hiding," he said. "But you're here now. No Jake, no distractions. Just us." I swallowed hard. This wasn't the Michael I knew, the steady, dependable dad who grilled burgers at Jake's barbecues or helped me fix my car when it broke down. This was someone raw, unguarded, and dangerously close to crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to draw. "Why does it matter?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. "Why do you care if I'm hiding?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, the towel slipping slightly as he crossed the small space between us. He stopped just inches away, towering over me, his presence overwhelming. "Because," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I see you, Elliot. I've always seen you." My breath caught. The air felt too thick to breathe, the steam blurring the edges of the world until it was just him and me. I wanted to run, to laugh it off, to pretend this wasn't happening. But my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot, my eyes tracing the lines of his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Michael," I started, but the words died in my throat. He was too close now, his hand hovering near my shoulder, not touching but close enough to make my skin prickle. I didn't know what he wanted, what I wanted, but the weight of it was crushing. The sauna door creaked, and I flinched, the spell broken. A gym employee poked his head in, oblivious to the tension. "Closing in 10, he said before disappearing. Michael stepped back, his expression unreadable. "We're not done," he said, grabbing his towel and heading for the door. Not by a long shot. I sat there, heart racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My best friend's dad had cornered me in a sauna, and I wasn't sure if I was terrified or thrilled. All I knew was that something had shifted, and there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up with Michael's words echoing in my head. I see you, Elliot. I couldn't shake the way he'd looked at me, like he was peeling back every layer I'd spent years building. I wanted to tell Jake, to spill everything. But how do you tell your best friend that his dad was making you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? Jake and I had been inseparable since sophomore year. He was the loud, carefree one, always dragging me into his chaos. I was the quiet one, the planner, the guy who kept us out of trouble. But lately, I'd been pulling away, not because I wanted to, but because being around Jake meant being around Michael. And Michael was a problem I didn't know how to solve. I met Jake at our usual coffee shop, a small place downtown with mismatched chairs and the best lattes in town. He was already there, scrolling through his phone, his blonde hair a mess from sleeping in. "You look like crap," he said as I slid into the booth. "Late night?" I forced a laugh. "Yeah, something like that." He didn't push. Thank God. Jake wasn't the type to dig too deep, which was why we worked. But as he rambled about his girlfriend's latest drama, my mind kept drifting back to the sauna. Michael's voice, his closeness, the way my body had reacted despite every rational part of me screaming to shut it down. I wasn't out not to Jake, not to anyone. I'd spent years convincing myself my feelings were just confusion, a phase I'd grow out of. But Michael's words had cracked something open, and I wasn't sure I could close it again. "You're zoning out," Jake said, snapping his fingers in front of my face. "What's up with you?" I hesitated. For a split second, I considered telling him. But what would I even say? "Hey, your dad cornered me in the sauna, and now I'm freaking out because I might be into him." Yeah, that'd go over well. "Just tired," I said, sipping my coffee to avoid his eyes. "Work's been brutal." He nodded, accepting the lie, and launched into a story about his new job. I listened, or tried to, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, and my stomach dropped when I saw the name, Michael. "Meet me at the gym tonight. 8 p.m. We need to talk." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. No emojis. No pleasantries. Just a command. I should have deleted it, blocked his number, told Jake everything. Instead, I typed a quick OK and hit send before I could overthink it. That night, I showed up at the gym, my nerves a live wire. The place was busier than the night before, filled with the clank of weights and the hum of treadmills. Michael was waiting by the lockers, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. He was in a fitted black tank top, his arms tanned and muscular, and I hated how my eyes lingered. "Elliot," he said, nodding toward the hallway. "Let's walk." I followed him, my heart hammering. We ended up in a quiet corner near the juice bar, away from the noise. He set his bag down and faced me, his eyes searching mine like they had in the sauna. "Why'd you come?" he asked, his voice low but not accusing. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "You said we needed to talk." He stepped closer, and I fought the urge to step back. "You could have ignored me," he said. "But you didn't." "Why?" I didn't have an answer, not one I was ready to admit. The truth was, I was here because I couldn't not be. Because something about him, his intensity, his certainty drew me in, even when it scared me. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "Maybe I'm just curious." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of a smile crossing his face. "Curious," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "That's a start." Before I could respond, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not playing games, Elliot. I've spent years trying to ignore this whatever this is. But I can't anymore. And I don't think you can either. My breath hitched. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the faint cedar of his cologne. I wanted to push him away, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, caught in the gravity of him, my mind screaming one thing while my body screamed another. Michael, I said, my voice cracking. We can't. He didn't move, didn't touch me, but his eyes held me in place. Can't? He asked. Or won't? I didn't have an answer. Not then. Not there. All I knew was that I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to step back. The days after that conversation were a blur of avoidance and obsession. I stopped going to the gym, ignored Michael's texts, and threw myself into work, hoping the chaos of my job at the bookstore would drown out the noise in my head. But every quiet moment brought him back his voice, his eyes, the way he challenged me to face something I'd spent years running from. I wasn't ready to admit what I was feeling. Not to him, not to myself. Growing up in a small town outside Seattle, I'd learned early to keep certain thoughts locked away. My parents were good people, but they weren't the type to talk about feelings, especially not those kinds of feelings. I'd spent my teenage years convincing myself I was just confused, that my attraction to guys was a phase I'd outgrow. By the time I moved to the city for college, I'd buried it so deep I almost believed it was gone. Until Jake noticed something was off. We were grabbing beers at a dive bar one night when he finally called me out. You've been weird for weeks, he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. What's going on? Man, you're like a ghost. I stared at my bottle, peeling the label to avoid his gaze. Just stressed, I said, the lie tasting bitter. Work, you know. He didn't buy it. Bullshit. You've been dodging me. Did I do something? The guilt hit hard. Jake didn't deserve this. He'd been my rock through high school, through my parents' divorce, through every breakup I'd had with girls I dated to prove I was normal. But how could I tell him the truth? That I was spiraling because of his dad. No, you didn't do anything, I said, forcing a smile. I'm just in my head. I'll snap out of it. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, letting it go. But the weight of the secret was crushing me. I needed to talk to someone. Anyone. But the only person I wanted to talk to was the one person I couldn't. A week later, I ran into Michael by accident. I was at the grocery store, grabbing stuff for dinner, when I turned a corner and there he was, holding a basket of produce, looking as surprised as I felt. He was in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly mussed. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Elliot, he said, his voice warm but cautious. You've been hard to find. I gripped my cart, my knuckles white. Been busy, I said, echoing the same weak excuse I'd given Jake. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning my face. You're a terrible liar, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Come on. Let's get coffee. No pressure. Just talk. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I didn't. We ended up at a small cafe down the street, tucked into a corner booth, the hum of conversation around us giving us a thin veil of privacy. He ordered black coffee. I got a latte, mostly to have something to do with my hands. Why are you doing this? I asked finally, my voice low. Why me? He leaned back, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. I've asked myself that 100 times, he said. You're Jake's friend. You're young enough to be my kid. But, he paused, his eyes locking onto mine. There's something about you, Elliot. Something real. I can't ignore it, no matter how hard I try. His words hit like a punch. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was, I felt it too. That pull, that connection, like a current I couldn't swim against. But it wasn't just about us. It was about Jake, about the life Michael had built, about the risk of blowing it all up. You're married, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You have a family. He flinched, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. It's complicated, he said. Susan and I, we've been drifting for years. But yeah, I'm still married. I'm not pretending this is simple. I stared at him, my mind racing. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. He was 47, a father, a husband, a man with a life I could barely understand. I was just a kid, barely out of college, still figuring out who I was. And yet, sitting there, watching the way his hands moved, the way his voice softened when he said my name, I felt something I couldn't deny. I don't know what to do with this, I admitted, my voice raw. I don't even know what I want. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. You don't have to know, he said. Not yet. But don't run from it, Elliot. Don't run from yourself. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't want to run. But I didn't know how to stay, either. The cafe conversation haunted me for days. I started noticing Michael everywhere, not physically, but in the way my mind kept circling back to him. The way he'd said my name, the way he'd stopped himself from touching my hand, the way he'd admitted his marriage was falling apart. It was like he'd handed me a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and I couldn't stop trying to solve it. I threw myself into distractions work, video games, late-night runs through the city, but nothing worked. My feelings for Michael were a tangled mess of desire, guilt, and fear. Desire, because I couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to close the distance between us. Guilt, because of Jake, because of Michael's wife, because of the life I'd be disrupting. And fear, because admitting I wanted him meant admitting who I was, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. One night, I broke. I was alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering through my window, and I texted him. Can we talk? Not at the gym. Somewhere private. His reply came within minutes. My place. Tomorrow. Susan's out of town. Jake's at his girlfriend's. 7 p.m. My stomach twisted. His place. The Carter house, where I'd spent countless weekends with Jake, playing video games, sneaking beers, laughing until we couldn't breathe. It felt wrong, but I couldn't say no. The next evening, I stood on their front porch, my heart pounding as I knocked. Michael opened the door, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, his expression a mix of relief and something deeper, something that made my chest ache. Come in, he said, stepping aside. The house felt different without Jake or Susan there. Quieter, heavier. We sat in the living room, on opposite ends of the couch, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. I didn't know where to start, so I just blurted it out. I'm scared, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know what this is, but it's messing me up. I can't stop thinking about you. And it's not supposed to be like this. He didn't interrupt, just watched me, his eyes steady and warm. When I finished, he leaned forward, his hands clasped. I'm scared too, he said. I've spent my whole life doing what I thought I was supposed to do. Marriage, kids, the whole package. But then you came along, and he shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. You make me question everything. I stared at him, my heart racing. What are we doing? Michael. This could ruin everything. Jake. Your family. My life. I know. He cut in. his voice sharp. You think I don't know? But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I've tried. Elliot. For years. I've tried. The air between us crackled. I wanted to argue, to tell him to stop. But the truth was, I didn't want him to. I wanted to know what it felt like to give in. Just once. Before I could think better of it, I slid closer, my knee brushing his. He froze, his breath catching, and for a moment, we just sat there, the space between us shrinking. Elliot, he said, his voice rough. If you don't want this, you need to tell me now. I didn't say anything. Instead, I leaned in, my lips brushing his, tentative at first, then harder, hungrier. His hands found my face, pulling me closer, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was hiding. It was reckless. It was wrong, but it was real. We pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against mine. This is dangerous, he whispered. I know, I said, my voice barely audible. But I don't care. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk between ecstasy and dread. Michael and I met in secret stolen moments in his car, late-night walks in empty parks, quiet corners of coffee shops where no one would recognize us. Every touch, every glance, felt like a rebellion against the world I'd known. But the higher we climbed, the more I felt the ground slipping beneath us. Jake started to suspect something. He didn't say it outright, but I could see it in the way he watched me, the way his jokes about my mystery plans carried an edge. One night, we were playing pool at a bar when he set his cue down and stared at me. You're keeping something from me, he said, his voice low. I'm not an idiot. Elliot. What's going on? My stomach dropped. I wanted to tell him, to unburden myself, but the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your best friend you're falling for his dad? That you're sneaking around behind his back, breaking every rule of loyalty you've ever known? It's nothing, I said, forcing a grin. Just personal stuff. He didn't push, but the distance between us grew. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop seeing Michael. He was like a drug, each moment with him making me crave more, even as the guilt ate me alive. One night, we were at a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. We were tangled in sheets, the world outside forgotten, when Michael turned to me, his expression serious. We can't keep doing this, he said. Not like this. It's not fair to you, or to Jake, or to Susan. I sat up, my heart sinking. What are you saying? He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes distant. I'm saying I need to figure out my life. I need to talk to Susan. Tell her the truth. About us. About me. The word us hit like a shockwave. I hadn't let myself think of us as an us. Not really. It was too big. Too impossible. You'd do that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You'd leave her? He looked at me, his eyes raw. I don't know if I can keep living a lie. But it's not just about me. It's about you, too. What do you want, Elliot? I didn't have an answer. I wanted him, but I wanted my friendship with Jake, my life, my sanity. I wanted to be brave enough to be myself. But the thought of coming out, of facing the world as a gay man, terrified me. And yet, with Michael, I felt like I could be. I don't know, I admitted. But I want this. I want you. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and for a moment, I believed we could make it work. But the real world was waiting, and it wasn't kind to secrets like ours. The breaking point came faster than I expected. Susan came home early from her trip, and Michael hadn't had the chance to talk to her. I was at their house, helping Jake with a project for his new job, when she walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. Elliot, she said. Her voice clipped. You're here a lot lately. I froze, my heart racing. Jake laughed, oblivious. Yeah, he's practically family, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. But Susan's gaze lingered, and I knew she suspected something. Later that night, Michael texted me. We need to be careful. Susan's asking questions. I didn't sleep that night. The walls were closing in, and I could feel it. The next day, I met Michael at a park, far from anyone we knew. He looked tired, his usual confidence replaced by something heavier. She knows something's up, he said. Not the details, but she's not stupid. I need to tell her. I nodded, my throat tight. What happens then? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I don't know, he said, but I'm done hiding. The next week was torture. Michael told Susan he needed to talk, but she was called away for work again before they could. I avoided Jake, my guilt making it impossible to face him. And then, one night, it all fell apart. I was at my apartment when Jake showed up, his face red with anger. You're screwing my dad, he said, his voice shaking. Don't lie to me, Elliot. I saw the texts. My world stopped. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Jake's eyes were wet, his fists clenched. You were my brother, he said, and you betrayed me. He left before I could say anything, the door slamming behind him. I sank to the floor, my chest heaving, the weight of what I'd done crushing me. I'd lost my best friend, and I didn't know if I'd ever get him back. The fallout was brutal. Jake wouldn't answer my calls, my texts, nothing. I tried going to his apartment, but he wasn't there, or he wouldn't open the door. I felt like I was drowning, the guilt and loss pulling me under. Michael was struggling, too. He and Susan were fighting, their marriage unraveling as he tried to be honest with her. He called me one night, his voice raw. I told her, he said. About us. About me. She's not handling it well. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be there for him, but I was barely holding myself together. What do we do now? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. But I'm not giving up on you. His words should have been a lifeline, but they felt like a weight. I wasn't sure I was worth it, not for him, not for anyone. But I couldn't let go of him, either. I started therapy, something I'd never thought I'd do. My therapist, a kind woman with a knack for asking hard questions, helped me untangle my feelings. For the first time, I said it out loud, I'm gay. The words felt foreign, but they also felt true. I wasn't just falling for Michael. I was starting to accept myself. I reached out to Jake again, this time with a letter. I poured everything into it, my confusion, my fear, my love for Michael, my regret for hurting him. I didn't know if he'd read it, but I had to try. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from him. Michael and I kept seeing each other, but it was different now, heavier. We weren't sneaking around anymore, but we weren't free, either. Susan had moved out, and Michael was living alone, trying to rebuild his life. I was trying to rebuild mine, too. One day, Jake texted me. Meet me at the coffee shop. 3 p.m. My heart raced as I walked in, spotting him in our usual booth. He looked tired, his eyes red, but he didn't look angry. I sat down, bracing myself. I read your letter, he said, his voice steady but quiet. It helped. I'm still pissed, Elliot. I don't know if I'll ever not be. But I get it. I get why you didn't tell me. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never wanted to hurt you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. And I know my dad's not perfect. Either. He told me everything about him. About you. It's a lot. We talked for hours, slowly rebuilding something fragile but real. He wasn't ready to forgive me completely, but he wasn't walking away. Either. It was a start. Michael and I kept going, navigating our relationship in the open for the first time. It wasn't easy. People stared, whispered, judged. But every time I held his hand, every time he smiled at me, it felt worth it. One night, we were at the park, watching the sunset. He turned to me, his eyes soft. You changed my life, Elliot, he said. You made me brave. I smiled, my heart full. You made me brave, too. We weren't perfect. We'd hurt people, made mistakes, but we were trying. And in the end, that was enough. We'd found something real, something worth fighting for, and we weren't letting go. Not now. Not ever.